on discovering Harmony Essentials. So just a little bit of background information before we get started. This webinar is going to go until 3 p.m. Eastern Time. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, there'll be two people as well as myself. I'm Desi, the moderator, and the person giving the webinar is Matisse, as you all know, and we'll also have Hubert. Hubert is also a trainer and a software instructor here at Toon Boom. He'll be able to answer questions as Matisse gives the webinar. So type in your questions. Feel free to ask any questions. We'll try to answer all your questions up until 3 p.m. today Eastern Time. Whatever questions we don't answer, you can always email us at webinar@toonboom.com and we'll get back to you. So before we start the webinar, I'll just introduce Matisse and tell you a little bit about him. Matisse has been with the company for a couple of years now, and he does a great job of presenting these webinars, and he knows Harmony inside out. He'll go through the nitty-gritty of Toon Boom Harmony Essentials. As most of you know by now, Harmony Essentials was released in April of this year, and really it's the beginner software in this platform, really, preceded by Harmony Advanced and Harmony Premium after that. So we're going to get started, and if you have any questions, again, don't forget to type them in. We'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
So hey everyone, it's Matisse. As Desi said, Harmony Essentials is the introductory level to the software. So it will provide you with a bunch of different features that will allow you to create paperless animation as well as basic cutout animation. You will also be able to use that software to create games or export to game engines such as Unity. Some of the features are not as complete as they are in the other softwares, but they will still allow you to do pretty much a good work based on the project that you're trying to create. So without further ado, I'll just get started and introduce you to the platform and the workspace that we have. So Harmony Essentials, just like our other softwares, is very customizable. So the workspace is extremely customizable. There's a lot of windows that you can have access to, as well as toolbars. In order to access new windows, you will see a plus sign corner at the top right corner of every window, and when you click on it, you have the other window options. In terms of toolbars, when you click in the gray area of the workspace, you'll have access to extra toolbars allowing you to do other stuff with the software. I'll go through both the windows and the toolbars as we go along in this session. So in this session, I will basically start by showing you like the concept of how the software works, as well as mostly how to create paperless animation, go through the process of drawing as well as inking your drawing, setting up a scene. So basically, Harmony is extremely useful because it allows you to do streamlessly the whole pipeline of your production, from pre-production to post-production. It is the software in which you'll also be able to create camera moves and all types of different things, such as effects. So I'll get started right now. So as when you create a Harmony scene, automatically you have a drawing layer that gets created. When there's a drawing layer, you can use your drawing tools to scribble around in it. There's a lot of different shortcuts that are extremely handy, such as pressing down the letter O and dragging to resize your cursor. When you are using any of the tools, in the tool properties window, you'll have access to extra options for those specific tools. So this is going to come in pretty handy. In terms of customizing your workspace, you're able to drag a window and move it around in the workspace to see where it snaps. So I'll set up my workspace the way I like to have it. All right. Okay, so back to the drawing tools. You have two different drawing tools that you can use. I don't know how many of you have been using Flash, but a lot of our customers have previous experience with Flash. So we have the brush tool and the pencil tool. They work in the same way that they work in Flash, meaning that they are vector based, and depending on the one you choose to draw with, the vectors are positioned differently. So if I press on the letter K, you can see that I have my vector points, and we can see that they're located differently based on the brush. So they all are on the side of the brush, or the pencil, which has the vector in the central position, allowing you to, for example, play with the Bezier handles and have the complete line thickness follow with the main vector orientation. Whereas if you want to modify a brush tool with this tool, for example, you'll have to move all of the contour points to reshape it. Of course, you could also just erase and redraw. Now, one of the differences between the two tools is that in this edition of the software, the pencil tool doesn't have any option to have variation in your line thickness. So whereas the brush, if I press harder on my tablet, I'm going to have a thicker stroke. That's not going to happen with the pencil tool. So that's something to bear in mind. Now, let's say that I want to create a little animation here. I can have a whole animation for a specific character or asset in one drawing layer. So I could have a little animation of a ball. Now in my timeline, I can scroll through, and when I go to another frame, I'm able to draw a new drawing. Now what happens with those drawings? How does Harmony handle the drawings? Basically, if we go into the library window, you'll see that there are kind of three parts to the library, but there's actually really two. One part is the drawing substitution. This will contain all of the different drawings that you've drawn in your drawing layer. So at any point in time, even when a drawing is not exposed, all of the drawings that you've previously drawn are still contained within the drawing substitution window, and you're able to call them back at any frame you wish. Now with that said, I will bring in a template of a already prepared ball animation in order to speed up the process of this presentation. Okay, so in this case, I have created a rough layer. How can you create a new layer? You can click on this Add Drawing Layer icon, name your drawing, and add and close or add. And then I've used the brush tool to rough up some animation. Let's just have a look at it for a quick second. So you can see it's just a ball bouncing from one edge to the screen to the other. If I am to press play here, it's going to go by really fast because the animation lasts for only 13 frames, as we can see here, and that is about half a second. When I have drawn some animation, I can change the exposure of my drawings pretty easily. So I can do a selection of all my drawings, right click, change the exposure, and then you'll see at the end you have some presets of exposure. So you could set it to 1 frame for each drawing, 2 frames, or 3 frames, or also create your own set of exposure. For example, if I want each drawing to be exposed for 8 frames. When that happens, you can see that my scene ends at 60 frames, but my exposure keeps on going till later. I can drag my red bracket to change the total length of my scene. Now, of course, my animation kind of runs for too long now, so I'll just change the exposure back to 2 frames for every drawing. When you are creating your animation, you might create it in a straight ahead fashion, which would mean going from frame to frame and just drawing whatever asset you're creating or animation you're creating in a new position. So going from this frame to another one and just creating that animation one frame after the other. Another way to create the animation is to plan it beforehand. And so in both cases, or mostly when you plan something, let's say I have the beginning and the end, I want to be able, when I draw my drawings in between, I want to be able to see my previous and my next drawing. If I activate my onion skin, there's blue brackets that appear around my cursor, and I can drag those blue brackets to extend the length of what I see in my onion skin. And so then I'll be able to see the previous and next position, and I'll be able to decide where I want to put my current frame position, and so on. Now, if I am to press delete, do a selection of my drawings and press delete, my drawings are still contained within the drawing substitution. So at the end, they will still be there. When you want to permanently delete a couple frames or drawings, basically, you will have to right click, go into the drawing, and click on delete selected drawings. After that, they're no longer contained in your drawing substitution. I'll remove my onion skinning. So the way that we deal with the steps of the process of creating animation is we recommend that you create a new drawing layer for each different step. For example, I have one layer for my rough animation. Now, when it comes to cleaning it, I will add a new art layer, a new drawing layer on which I will do my cleanup. So what I can do is, for example, duplicate my layer, or simply create a new layer, call it clean, and then on this layer here, I'll start drawing or cleaning my artwork. Now, depending on the style of line that you want to get, you'll pick either the brush or the pencil, because as I said, the pencil will only allow you to do one thickness for all your line, whereas you can have thickness variation with the brush. If you do not mind having only one thickness, you can, for example, use the ellipse tool in this case because it's a ball, so it's going to be easier to clean. And I'll be able to start cleaning up my artwork. I'll go to every new drawing and start cleaning it like this. So I will not clean all of the drawings right now just because I've done it already, but I just want to show you the process that I go through in order to clean it. If it was a shape that is a bit more complex than a circle, basically, I like using the pencil, the central vector technology. So I'm a big fan of that. So if I was to have a more complex shape, for example, if I go back to my rough, now let's go on my clean. The other tool that I like using to clean up is the Polyline. So with the Polyline, I have control over the amount of points that get created as I draw or clean any shape, because I can just click away and therefore control the amount of points. I can also go, for example, in my tool properties, snap to contour to close my shape. And then when I want to modify the lines that I have, now I'll take the contour editor and just drag my lines a little bit. Now some lines will move more than others, but it's all good. After moving them, you'll see there's Bezier handles that come out of the points. Once two Bezier handles are aligned, they move together. Sometimes you like that, but some other times you want them to move independently from one another. You'll be able to do that by holding down Alt and moving. So that's how I would clean up a shape. It goes by pretty fast. Alright, so let's remove my new layer. and I'll activate the clean layer that I have cleaned up beforehand. The other useful thing about using the pencil line is that you're also able to select it afterwards and change some of its properties. In this edition, I can change only the size of the line, but in other editions, I would be able to change the texture of the line, so I'd be able to actually apply a texture on a vector line, which is pretty interesting. So once my cleanup is done, what I want to do is paint it. So in this case, what I'll do is I'll duplicate the layer. Why am I going to do that? Because basically, when you want to fill in an area with paint, you would not be able to fill an area that is not closed by vectors. So what I mean by that is, let's just create my paint layer like this. I'll bring it over the clean. I'll also hide the rough and the clean layer. So what I mean by painting inside a closed vector shape is, let's go and pick some color here. I'm currently trying to paint it here, but there's no vector. This is just blank. The only area that I would really be able to paint in is the ball. When you press on K, you see the vector strokes. Sometimes a style of drawing would be to have shapes that are not completely closed, but you still want to be able to paint them in. So in order to go around that, you can use a stroke or the close gap tool to create a vector line that has absolutely no thickness. So the close gap will create a straight line between 2 points, and then I would be able to fill that with color. Let's take another color here. So you can see I can achieve another type of look if I desire. All right. So what we like to do with the tools that we provide you with is allow you to work more efficiently, speed up your work process, and streamline all of the different steps that you go through as you create your project. One way that we do that is by providing you tools that will give you the flexibility of, let's say, paint a sequence of drawings in one click. So I'll show you how to do that right now. If I am to just pick my regular paint bucket, I am now picking the specific color that I want, and I'll talk about colors a bit later. If I am to go into Tool Properties and click on this icon, Apply to Multiple Drawings, I can make a selection in which I know my sequence of drawing is contained. By doing so, I can see everything has been filled in with color. So that's really handy. But if we look closer, we can see that our contour line, has also been painted. Let's undo that. In the paint bucket, you have other options such as paint unpainted, which is exactly what we want right now in order to maintain the color that we already have on our outline. So I'll just click again on the same option and fill in the area while maintaining the line that is the outline that has already been painted. Now this has been pretty easy for me to fill in this ball because it was only one region or one color that had to be painted in. What happens if you have multiple colors? Well, you'll do this process many times. You can go about it in two ways, really. Either you will start working and painting in the bigger areas that hold the major color. So let's say whatever asset you have is majorly red but has yellow dots. You might decide to fill it all with the red color, unpaint the areas that should be painted in yellow, and then go through the process of applying the yellow color to all the unpainted areas again. Or you will go the other way and paint in all the yellow dots and then filling in all the red color. In any case, once you've already painted a layer or any artwork really, you're going to be able to still change the colors without having to repaint anything. So let's talk a bit about how we manage our colors. In the first section of the color window, you have the possibility of having many palettes. This is useful as, for example, if I have 15 characters in this scene and they all have a lot of colors contained within them, if they were all in the same palette, I will have a lot of color swatches. It would be kind of disorganized. So what I would do is create a new palette for every single asset, individual asset. And in a palette, you can have an unlimited amount of swatches. Now, what are the swatches? They don't just hold color, and actually there are numbers. So, for example, this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and the list goes on. This is extremely useful because instead of painting in a color, the fact that you're painting in a number allows you to then change the color associated to that number later on. So I can double click on my swatch and change the color of my ball by just changing the color that is associated to that swatch number 3. And everywhere where number 3 has been painted, the color is going to change accordingly. All right, so now that we have our little animation, let's put it in a context of a real scene, for example. So let's have a background. Now, again, for the sake of time, I'll just bring a background that I've already created. But what you would do, basically, I have grouped those layers. How did I group them? You select them all and click on Group Selection. I'll collapse my group by just clicking on the minimizing icon of the group here. I'll bring in my background, basically. But what you would do is create a new layer and name it background or whatever name you want to give it. And then the setup or the ordering of the layers is whatever's on top is really on top of everything else. So at the moment, because I'm using some of my drawing tools, which the icons of the drawing tool end at the hand icon here. At the bottom, it's more of the animation icons. But because I'm in one of the drawing tools icons, it's kind of, I'm not seeing my scene for what it is really. I'm kind of just in a drawing state. If I want to see it for what it is, I can click on the transform tool, which also is a tool that we're going to use later on to do other things with. Now you can see that because my background group is over my ball, I don't see my ball anymore. So let's just drag my group under. All right. So let's open our different layers so you can see all the different layers that I have here. If I drag or if I go elsewhere in my timeline, you can see that we no longer see my drawings. You can see why on the timeline. You can see that the drawings are only exposed for the first frame. We are going to change that. Let's say we want the scene to end at frame 60. I'm going to select all of my frames here and click on F5 to extend a drawing exposure. Let's also make our scene last only that long. Now we can see that the ball has the same issue. It shows up and then it disappears because inside the exposure is not going to frame 60. You can also extend the exposure of a group. So you can collapse a group, press F5, and have all the content within the group have its exposure extended. How about we create a camera movement? In here, you have an icon, a plus sign, that if you click and hold, you'll see a bunch of other types of layers that you can bring in. So effects, but you can also see a camera here. When you have a camera, it always shows up at the bottom of your timeline. In order to move your camera, it needs to have a peg. So what is a peg? It is a layer that cannot hold a drawing, so no drawing in a peg at all, but it will contain motion data. So by having my camera selected, I'll just click on this little icon, Add Peg. So let's do that. All right, so I have a peg here. Being on my peg and on my transform tool, I'm able to change the position of my camera. I can also zoom in by dragging the corners. So let's do something like this. Here, as soon as you move anything with the transform tool, you're applying some kind of data, transformation data, to that specific layer. And as soon as there's a data change, there's a keyframe that gets created on the timeline. I'm going to get to like the end of the animation of my ball, and I'm going to move the camera here, maybe zoom in more. Now that I have two keys, automatically there's also an interpolation that got created. Now, how about we make this a multiplane? What I mean by that is, how about we space out our layers at different depth in compared to the camera, and therefore have them overlap one another when the camera moves. So in the software, we have a 3D space that you don't have the window in this edition that allows you to really navigate the 3D space, but you have another window that allows you to see it, to see the depth. So the top window, what is it? Or what are we actually seeing here? Basically, you're looking at your scene from the top. And so the white vertical axis is the z-axis, where the horizontal one is the x-axis. And that big triangle points to the location of the camera. So if I scroll around in my timeline, you can see the camera position changing. By default, all of your assets will get created at the 0, 0 point of the scene. Now, this allows me to take an asset and move it further away from the camera. To do so, I am going to need my advanced animation toolbar. And I am going to use the translate tool, which will show up some little arrows here that I'll be able to push. So as I push it, if we look at what happens in our camera view, because the asset gets further away from the camera, of course, it diminishes in size. Now, in my planning of this scene, I had not planned to make a layer that is way bigger just because I knew or planned to move it further away from the camera. So it doesn't really pleases me that I get this size issue, or not issue, but impression with this asset. So I'm going to undo, and there's another icon in the advanced animation toolbar that you can use, which is the maintain size tool. By using the maintain size, you can push an asset further away, but the size will not change at all. So let's do that for all of our layers. Have the tree be maybe we can just leave it here. All right. And so now let's look at it a bit more. I'm going to push it even further away, this one, so that we see more of the overlap of the layers. They do not move at the same time. So you'll get this overlap of layers as the camera moves, which will give the impression of depth and space. All right. So something we can also do with things that have interpolation is change their trajectory. What do I mean by that? Well, our camera currently is going like zooming in, but also going from side to side. I'm able to see the path or the trajectory of my camera by selecting its peg. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of toolbars that are available in this software, and some toolbars are based on windows. So for example, the camera window, if I right click, I can have access to the camera view toolbar. In this toolbar, I'll click on show control, which will show me the trajectory of my camera in this case. I could change it without having to create new keyframes, but instead going over my path and clicking on the letter P, which creates a control point that I can move to change how my asset that I've picked will will move basically or be impacted. Another thing I can do with interpolation is change the spacing. So as we can see with the trajectory here, basically every little line is shows you the new position of the camera. And it's very even at the moment because interpolation by default creates an even spacing for the whole interpolation process. But I can change that by clicking on my keyframe and having my timeline view toolbar active. I can then click on set ease for multiple parameters. When I click on this, I get a little graph. What I see here is on the x-axis the timeline. So what I'm seeing for the numbers is the number of frames. It's not very precise, but it doesn't really need to be because you have a maximum of 3 keyframes that you can see here. The keyframe that is in the middle is always the one that you're currently working on and modifying. You see there's kind of a little bracket here that I can pull. If I pull this way, what I'm saying is for a longer period of time, the position that I have set on one, the frames that follow will look more like the position set on frame 1. So if I hit apply, you can also see the change in the spacing. If I pull it the other way, it's going to go quickly out of this position and go into the next ones. So let's have like an ease out here. If you hit apply next or apply previous, you can also navigate through your keyframes. And so for example, apply next will bring me to my other keyframe. And this one I'll also be able to adjust it the way I want to have it. So maybe have it a little bit less drastic. All right. So another thing you can do is mix paperless with a cutout workflow. So what I mean by that is even on assets that I've animated paperless in a paperless fashion, such as the ball, I would be able to move that ball around using my transform tool and add keyframes to it. So what if we want our ball to actually, instead of going from one edge of the camera to another, we want it to get kicked further in space? Well, I would be able to select my group, add a peg to it, add a keyframe here to hold the position, let's say F6, to create a keyframe. And actually my keyframe, I want it to be on the last frame before my ball leaves the ground. And so because my camera is moving and is kind of distracting me from seeing when exactly that happens in my animation, I'll make it invisible so that I only see my animation here. All right, so the last frame is this one. So I'll grab my keyframe and I'll move it to the specific location that I want. And I'll create another keyframe when my ball lands on the ground, F6. All right. And then here, in this case, I want to change the position of the ball. So I'm going to push it away. And as you can see, in this case, I used the transform tool. I could have used the translate, which gives the arrows that are a bit easier to manipulate. but I can still use the transform tool, for example, here to position it differently. Okay, so now you can see it goes deeper in space and therefore changes size. Sweet. Now there's also there's two issues. Well, there's one issue that actually shows up when you do a decision like that, or when you have the camera on. And so if we look at our scene more closely, we can see that the ball seems to lag a little bit. It's like jagging. Well, the reason for it is that our ball has a new drawing at every 2 frames, whereas the peg that is on the ball and moving the ball in space has a new position every frame because of the interpolation. So in order to fix that, we're going to have to convert our interpolation into keyframes, and a new keyframe that will set basically the new position at the same time as a new drawing shows up. In order to do that, I'll work my way backwards, and basically at every 2 frames, I'll create a new keyframe. So once again, it's F6 to create a new keyframe. And I will do a selection because, as you can see, there's still interpolation between my keys. And I will go and hit this button, set stop motion keyframe, which removes the interpolation. So now every time my ball has a new drawing, it also has a new position. So in between those positions, there's no lagging factor anymore. If I turn on my camera again, we'll see that we face the same issue. So once you're happy with your movement, the trajectory that your camera, or I could also have played with the trajectory of my ball peg, for example, in the same way. Once I'm happy with it all, I'll convert it again to keyframes. So I have to do it manually in this edition of the software. I would not have to do it manually in advanced and premium. There's a button that kind of does it for you in one click, which is pretty handy. But in this case, we'll just do it this way. All right. So what else can you do? You could add effects. But before adding effects, let's talk about the 2 views that you can have in your camera. We're currently working in the OpenGL view. It is the view that allows you to work and play back your animation in real time. So if I hit the play button, I'll see all my animation in a very fluid way. If I go on my render button, then I'm seeing a soft render version of what my scene looks like at the end. So it's no, you can see here the resolution or the optimization of the drawing is kind of like jaggy like that. But in the render, it's no longer like that. It's pretty much rendered all smoothly. Something we can see right away is that the background is black. Why is it black? Because the gray background that you see here is actually part of your workspace and not part of your scene. And the color that we use to output alpha is black. So that's what we're seeing here. It's basically transparency. If I want to have, for example, a background color, of course I could create a new layer and just make like a rectangle or something and fill it with color, or I could add a color card. So what is a color card? It is a big sheet of color that you can customize. So if I double click on the layer, I access the properties of it. In this case, I can click on the color here and change it. Now we can also see that we don't see our background layers anymore. The reason is the space. So if I want to move my color card, I would have to move it in the space to to reposition it and put it behind all of my other background layers so that I can see it. Let me just do that quick. All right. When you click on the color card, there's a lot of like little squares. I don't like seeing them, and there's no point in really selecting or clicking on a color card because you are not moving it anywhere. So what I usually do to prevent the little squares from appearing is I lock my layer so that when I click on it, I can't select it by just clicking. Now if I go on my render view, we can see the background. Something we could decide to do is add effects, such as, what can we do? Click on the plus sign here. Effects such as a blur on my ball, a glow maybe, some shadow, transparency, things like that. Let's say that I'm going to add a blur. I'm going to select my paint layer, and I'm going to go into my effects and select the blur. The effects will appear under, and you will see it's kind of like a hierarchy. You'll see like the chain of parenting. If I click on the plus sign of the blur, I can also see its properties, or I can double click on it to see its properties here. In the OpenGL view, most of the effects, the changes that you'll do will not show. So if I am to change the radius, there's no change visible in the OpenGL view. But if I go in my render view, you can see that there has been a change. You can also animate the change of effects over time. So I can add a keyframe and maybe another keyframe at the end here. And I'll click on this keyframe button to access the graph and change the value of my radius in this case. And now it will slowly get blurrier and blurrier over time, as you can see. All right. So you can feel free to explore all of the effects that we have in the software. Now, there's something else that I want to show you, which is more related to cutout or other type of animation. So let's just go back here and maybe deactivate my camera and even pretty much everything. I'll create a new layer on which I'll just do a basic shape, and I'll fill it with color. Okay. I'll also extend the exposure, F5. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to animate this rectangle and bend it without having to redraw anything. So in cutout, you can animate and rotate things, but if I wanted to bend it, you would think that you'd have to redraw the shape in another bent, like in another position. But you don't really have to. So instead, we can use what we call deformers. The deformer toolbar is already active as you start your scene. In the tool properties, we have a lot of different deformer types, but in this software, we have only two, and actually only one, really. So it's the bone deformer. I'll show you what it does. The other type of deformer we have is the game bone, which I'll talk about just after this demonstration. So as I am on my drawing layer, I click on my deformation rigging tool, and I will just click and release, click and release, click and release. If I just leave it like that, just like anything you animate cutout, you will use the transform tool to animate it. Now I can drag on my bone and bend it. Just like any other cutout thing you do, it creates keyframes, and you can have multiple keyframes in between which you'll interpolate. Now we can obviously see that the lines overlap one another, and it's probably not the effect that I wanted. So let's undo this. The circle in the middle that you'll see is the articulation point. If I go back on my rigging tool, I can change the setup of whatever deformer I'm working with. And so I can make the articulation bigger. This will make my drawing bendier and also what we call break later on. So I can go here later in the timeline, have an interpolation, and I could go again and modify the ease and the spacing and all that. Now let's remove this little thing. I'll go in my library. So you've seen me use the library a little bit. I showed you the drawing substitution section where all your drawings will be contained within one drawing layer. Now the two other parts which I said were more like one part is basically a storage. So it actually allows you to store assets that you will be able to bring back in other scenes, as I've done so far. So I will bring in a character, as I said as well, that you're able to create animation for games. So let's close our top view now. So here we have a little character animation. If we look at all the character, let's see if there's deformers here. And basically all of the character is using deformers. So all of the animation is done through manipulating the deformers. Some other things that are interesting is the fact that in the effects you have something called a cutter, which is basically a mask, and you can decide to mask something within or outside of other assets. So let's just click here. You can see the pupil only shows through the eye because of a cutter. Now let's talk about deformation again. The game bone is the bone that you'll want to use when it comes to creating, deformation on a character when you want to send it to a game engine like Unity. So if you rig something with just the bones and you try to send it to Unity, you will not get the exact same result animation-wise. So it's way better for you to create your bones with a game bone. Once it's done, so if we look at, for example, the arm here, you can see that the arm is pretty much straight. It's just been shaped or positioned through the use of all the deformations. Now, we are also able to export all of this to the game engine. And so the engine of our choice is Unity, but basically you are able to export to other game engines if you wish. I'll just go and get my script that I need. Export to Spreadsheet, bringing it in my toolbar. We see the little script appeared. Now, what we do pretty well is when you export, we allow you to export to multiple resolutions at once. So usually it's a thing that people have to do over and over again. There are some that come by default. As you can see, you can click on the plus sign and add your own. When you click on export, let's have a look at what it does. It will basically create a sprite that looks somewhat like that. Once in Unity, we have a package that you can download from the Unity store called Harmony, and it will basically bring in all of the different folders that you need in order to run the integration between Harmony and Unity pretty well together. Something we can see in the scene section, I'll just load the game previewer. I'll be able to access all of the different animations of my character through here. All right. Other things we're able to do are adding some lighting through Unity that will impact the character in different ways, and you can see also the shadow is impacted. You'll also be able to basically we export many different files, the sprite sheet, but also XML files that give all of the animation information and like rigging information and all that. But it's also a file that you can extract data from in order, for example, to give a location from the character that is then used by Unity to, in this case, shoot out things from a gun. So I went 5 minutes over time, but I'm now open for questions. So let's see here. So Hubert, maybe you want to unmute yourself and uh, tell me some questions that the users are asking.
So actually, we don't have any questions. So that must mean that what you did was really thorough, and everybody seems to be, understanding everything you've had to say up to now. We have a couple more minutes, so we could keep demoing, or we could end the webinar a couple minutes early. And again, if anybody has any questions, please email us at webinar@toonboom.com, and we'd be happy to answer any questions. But I think, Matisse, you did a really great job, and Hubert didn't have to answer any questions.
All right. I do see some questions though in the question section.
Oh, you do? Okay. Well, we don't see them on Hubert's computer,
Right.
so maybe you could.
So give me just a second. I'll read through.
Sure.
And okay. Okay, so Julian Goldstein is asking, how would you add a character to the palette? So just in case that this has not been answered or understood properly, you can basically add a new palette here, right? So you click to create a new palette, and then you name that palette. And in that palette, you'll add different colors, and you'll decide what color all those swatches correspond to. What I also like about this system is that my palettes, my colors can have names. And so I will not name my color by the color name, but rather by what the color is being used for. So if this is my line, for example, I'll name it line. Maybe this is my skin tone, so I'll name it skin. And if I press enter, it just keeps coming, making me go from color to color so that I can rename everything. So you don't have to go through and double click on the name to change it. So some of you are asking if you will have access to this presentation. So yes, you will. I know I've covered a lot of ground through the presentation and it's been pretty fast. So it has been recorded. We will upload it online and we will give you a link to access it. So I'm guessing in the next 24 hours, you'll get a link to that. So, okay, Steven Serrano is asking, if you were re-entering the industry today, what are some of the things you would be doing to best prepare yourself? I would definitely learn how to use Harmony because it is a software that is being used majorly all over the world in many, many, many different studios. It is a software that is also being integrated more and more in schools. And the more you know about it and know how to use it, the more prepared you would be for the animation industry. Now, depending on which type of position you'd like to have, maybe you want to be an animator, maybe you want to do design, all of those will go through the pipeline, the Harmony pipeline. Maybe you even want to do effects, If, let's say that if you want to do anything cut out that is like studio quality as well as compositing, I definitely encourage you to get the premium edition. The reason why I'm saying this is there's a lot of different things that are very major in the premium edition, but one of the most major thing is a window that is called a node view. And what the node view is is a visual representation of all the assets that you have in your scene. What this allows you to do is do complex rigging as well as scene management of the asset and complex compositing between assets. Every studio uses the premium edition. Okay. All right, someone asks, let me see who that is. Ronald asks if I can clarify exposures. Is it the amount of time a frame stays on screen? So yes, it is. And so in animation, you have 24 frames equals a second. And basically, of course, you could have a new, drawing every frame, but that would mean that you'd have 24 drawings in a second. That can be a lot, especially if you draw paperless. So what we do, something that is pretty useful, is that the eye will not notice that there's a double exposure if you have a drawing that is basically a drawing that is exposed for 2 frames. The eye will not notice that it's basically staying in front of it for longer, that it's exposed for longer. It will be very smooth. Even like, for example, like animation, they would do one new drawing every 4 frames in order to cut down costs and speed up the production. So that's what exposure is for. Right. I'm just reading through here. Oh yeah, okay. Cameron Perez is asking, how do you save a character in the library? Great question. I forgot to show that. Sorry. So what you will do, I'll give a bit more explanation about how the library works. Basically, when you create a scene, you will have the symbol library, which I don't really use ever, and then the stage essential library, which I also never use. What are those folders? Basically, and how did I get new ones? So when you create something and you want to store it in your library, you're not storing it in the software per se. You're storing the template in a specific location on your computer. And so you have to create that specific location beforehand. When that folder is created, you can then right click and say open library. Then you will go and locate the folder that you want to have, for example, this one, in your library. And then you have access to all of the content within, which in this case, most probably would be all templates from Harmony. You can also remove a library by just selecting it, right click, say close library. Now, when you want to drag something in, so for example, I want to bring this animation inside my library. I will select it from the timeline, I will drag it here, and I will try to just release. Now nothing happens. The reason is, and actually your computer will have like the little beep sound saying nothing worked. The reason is that the library that you're trying to put it in is locked, as you can see. You need to have the right to modify by just clicking on it in order to put new things in or delete things. So now I can bring this in. It will ask me how I want to name it. I can say okay. I can remove it from my scene just to show you. And you can see that animation, everything will stay. So the parts, but also the animation will come with it. So also, when you put things in the library, they are available to you through the library. So you also have access to always the same library in any new Harmony scene. You will create new Harmony scenes quite often. So something interesting or important to know is that Harmony is not meant to be used, like you will not, let's say I'm working on a little short film for 2 minutes and in my mind, I might be thinking, well, I'm just going to create one harmony scene that will last for those 2 minutes. Even though I have a lot of cuts, within my 2 minutes film, I have many, many scenes. That's not how it works with harmony. You will create a new harmony scene for every single scene you have. And so you will want, most likely, to have access to some assets throughout all the scenes of your project. So for example, a background that you'll reuse really often, you'll want to put it in. A character rig, something like that, you'll want to have it all in there. Okay, so Joe and Gary is asking, can you duplicate a character and modify it to make a different one? If so, how do you do that? Yes, you can. So basically, I'm guessing you mean like a cutout character. So when you have something important to note is that when you bring something in from the library, it is no longer really linked to that template in the library. If I'm modifying this asset, I'm not modifying it from the library. So for example, if I modify the skin color here, so let's say I'm gonna find that and modify it, maybe something a bit more clear. All right, this. If I go back to the library and bring my character again, well, in this case, this one, yeah, uses the same palette, but you'd have an option to bring the character in that will create also a new palette. What you can also do is duplicate the palette to change it and have one character use one of the palette and the other one use the other. Something you'll be able to do, so if I am to remove this still and bring in my wish link again, here we have our character again. If I want to modify the parts, like the design, I will basically, it depends. Like it really depends. Sometimes it's not worth just modifying a whole character if the character that you're going to create afterwards is going to be completely different. It would be better for you to just create a completely new rig rather than modifying the one that you already have, because it's going to be more work. But if it's like, oh, it's the same character, but the new one will have like fluffy ears and like a beard, then you would just be able to add those extra layers within the rig or modify the artwork that is used here and change it. All right. So someone is asking how to do the shading on, how did the shading on this character was done? Basically, it's been done through colors. So let's check it out. See, we have some palettes here. I'm pressing on K to see. I'm going to go on my drawing camera, my drawing window, which allows me to see my drawing neutral. So, because in my camera, as you can see, it's been animated, so it's changed the position. But if I want to see it in like the regular position, the neutral position, I can just go in my drawing. All right, so that shading here is basically an extra color that has been put on it. Now, there's many ways to do that, but basically what you can understand from this is that you're not obligated to do flat colors. You can also create gradients. So you can either have a solid one or a gradient. Just clicking here. So let's actually create a new color so that I can explain that better. And this will be the last question, and we're going to wrap up after that. So if I click on gradient, I have two paint buckets. If I click on the paint bucket, I'm basically changing the color of that specific bucket. If I move the bucket, I'm changing how fast the gradient is changing. If I just click in an empty space here, I'm adding new buckets so that I can have like more colors in my gradient. I can also have a radial gradient here, and you'll be able to just paint in and modify that gradient through the Edit Gradient tool. So I hope this has been very informative for you. It was a pleasure to demonstrate the software for you. If you have any additional questions, feel free to shoot us an email at webinar@toonboom.com. You will get the recording in the next 24 hours.
So again, thanks once again, and we're always here to answer any questions you have. You can check in with us by email, social media, or give our support team a call as well if there's anything more important. And last but not least, thank you, Matisse, and thank you, Hubert. You guys are always great, and hopefully this was helpful.
All right. Have a great day.